Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Out of all the different classes that we've been taking a close look when it comes to 11.2 PTR, and I noticed that some classes are getting a lot more attention than others. Classes like Death Knights, Hunters, and Mages seem to be getting like a bunch of new changes and tuning things and talent adjustments with every single patch build, but some of the other classes like Warlocks, for instance, are barely talked about. Though they did end up buffing them up recently when it comes to their hero talents in particular, with Diabolus, the Soul Harvester, as well as Hellcaller all receiving major amps all across the board, which are sizable. Some abilities buffed up by up to 50%, if not more in some cases, which is kind of wild to see. On top of it, Warlocks are also getting a new array of tier sets that have also gone through a number of tuning in 11.2. But instead of being typical class sets or spec sets that give you spec-specific bonuses, there are instead bonuses that amplify your hero specs instead. With the patch 11.2 drawing also soon, it looks like Warlocks are more or less set in stone, minus some final tuning. So I want to take a look at how their hero specs are looking so far over on the PTR, but also how those hero specs are going to be further impacted by the newer tier set bonuses. Though a bit of a spoiler, a lot of the bonuses are surprisingly passive, and I really was hoping they'd do more with them. So while Warlocks are looking to get a sizable power increase heading into the seasonal update, it is not quite what everybody wanted it to be. But with that, as always, if you guys want to keep up with any major class changes for the upcoming patch 11.2, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. I swear, Silverburn looks so good with this rain instead of being constantly in like either too bright mode or like always a sunset mode. It looks so good. I mean, the buildings could probably be upgraded, but I'm assuming that'll happen in midnight. That being said, we are going to be going over Warlock changes, and I kind of wish Warlocks got a lot more for 11.2. At this point, I'm assuming that they're not really going to be getting too many crazy talent changes or major adjustments. I would have loved that they got the rework that Death Knight's gotten, where they still feel familiar, but got like a lot of good options where Death Knight is feeling improved to play. And I wish Warlocks got some kind of like a improvement in that regard as well. Though it looks like at the very least, depending on tuning, it does seem like this class can actually slam decent damage in some situations. Now, majority of Warlock changes so far, at least over the last few builds, have been focusing on hero specs, but also the tier set. So I'm going to combine them together, talking about what the hero spec is, but also how the tier set is going to impact the playstyle. Spoiler, they don't really have too many cool spec-specific changes for each one. They're more hero spec changes that don't really end up helping out destruction, demonology, or affliction in a unique way, but kind of just help out the hero spec more than anything, which will impact the Warlock specs, but it's a little bit less nuanced compared to some of the other classes that we've taken a look at so far. Now, the first thing I can say about the actual tier set though, since this is a tier set video, is I think this thing looks gorgeous. I love how the belt has multiple, belts to it, but then there's also a spell tome on the side. For the longest, I've heard players asking Blizzard if they could add stuff like this in the future where you could have little accessories that could be on your belt, or maybe can be like, I don't know, around your wrist or something. And I like how they have been adding a lot more 3D bits to armor, and the book in particular looks absolutely so good. I also like the combination there with the robe, as well as how there's like a drape around it as well. I like the layers to it, I guess. And of course, the massive maw portal that is the helm. Definitely one of the more wackier sets they've done, but I'm a big fan of this, as well as the different eyeballs and demonic glyphs all over your character. I'm a huge fan of this set in general. I heard that not everybody liked this set, but I was surprised by it because majority of players, or friends of mine at least, that I talked to, everybody seems to enjoy this set, as well as some of the different recolors. Even the Raid Finder looks so wicked good. It has this like really dark green demonic colors to it, and the portal looks a little different than the mythic version. Of course, there's also the normal, which looks like the normal Legion Fel green, as well as the red, the Flames of Zoroth kind of look to it. Looks wicked. Then, of course, there's the Gladiator set, which I even like this green color, even though it's not my favorite, but the Crimson together with the turquoise isn't terrible. And then, of course, the Elite, absolute Hellfire look. It looks amazing. Not a big fan of the green glow of the shoulders. I was hoping it would change together with the color of your set, like have a red glow around the red set, but either way, I think the set looks absolutely good. Although I did hear not everyone's favorite, so everybody's gonna have a different take on whether this looks good visually or not. From there though, we got the actual hero talent changes that gotten a bunch of tunings, which is basically a bunch of buffs all across the board. So I'm going to go over every single one of the hero specs, starting from Diabolus, go to Hellcaller, and then Soul Harvester, but then also introduce the tier set that takes all those hero specs to the next step. The main mechanic of a Diabolus is to summon up additional demons into combat, and some of those demons actually grant you additional abilities that you can utilize, like the Overlord, the Pit Lord, as well as the Chaos Mother are going to be the 3 demons that are buffed up this time around. The Overlord's Wicked Cleave ability is being buffed up by 50 within PvE content, but not in PvP. The Chaos Mother, Chaos Salvo, the main ability she uses, buffed up also by 50. With lots of damage increases there, but also the Infernal Bolt ability she provides you, buffed up by 55%, so it's massive. The Pit Lord Felseeker ability, his primary core skill, is also buffed up by 50. That's a lot of big damage increases here, but also the Ruination is also buffed up by 50, though not in PvP, only in dungeons and raids specifically. Also, Flames of Zoroath further is empowered to increase the effectiveness of your demons and fire abilities by 4% instead of 2%. And while fire isn't a huge portion of demonology-based gameplay, you do have abilities such as Demon Bolt, which is a mix of Shadow Flame, so that does count as fire, as well as things like Hand of Gul'dan, which is also Shadow Flame, that counts as fire, as well as a small number of abilities that have a tinge of fire to them as well. The actual tier set for both Demonology and Destra's Diabolus is to summon up eyeballs, demonic oculuses, every time you spend soul shards. For Demonology in particular, it is whenever you use Hand of Gul'dan at full power. For every single one of these eyeballs you summon, you collect them and store them. And whenever you summon up a full-on demon, either the big Overlord, Pit Lord, or Chaos Mother from the Diabolus gameplay, it also flings these eyeballs at the target, causing them to do millions of damage. Primary target takes a little bit more damage, cleave enemies also take some subsequent damage, and it also grants you intellect buff every time you fling them, increasing your intellect by 2%. Now, the actual damage the eyeballs do, at least right now, is tuned pretty well. Throughout my dungeon, it actually did a decent bit of my overall damage just through passively eyeballs alone. The uptime of that intellect buff, roughly usually 6% intellect, is about 70% uptime. So it's decent, and numerically it might be okay, but it is kind of like a boring tier set, to be honest. It doesn't necessarily change or improve Diabolus in some way, it just adds you additional extra damage without necessarily changing your gameplay. For some players, this is going to be all you need. A tier set does more damage, sign me up, that's all I need. But I usually like tier sets to be a little bit more interesting or to improve the hero spec in one way or another. But it looks like Blizzard felt like the Diabolus does not really need to be improved, so they're just getting a slight 6% intellect buff, which is fine. It's just kind of boring compared to some of the other effects that could have applied for the set in general. Now, the next hero spec that we take a look at is that of a Hellcaller, which gotten a bunch of buffs for both Affliction and Destruction, though the values of these buffs are going to be slightly different depending on one spec or another. But the main ability of Wither for Affliction has gotten buffed up by 15%, though this buff is not going to impact PvP at all, but it does make the damage over time gameplay of a Hellcaller a little bit stronger. For Affliction, the Blackened Soul proc that you can build up with your Soul Shard spenders has also been buffed up by 30%. Though, just like Wither, this also does not apply for PvP specifically. Then you also get the buffs on the left-hand side and right-hand side, Xylan's Ferocity and Xylan's Cruelty. Xylan's Ferocity will now increase your fire damage by 6% instead of 2%, while the playstyle of Xylan's Cruelty will increase your shadow damage abilities by 6% instead of 2%. So I guess it's a slight buff. And technically, Affliction Warlock is primarily a shadow source of a caster. However, the damage of Wither is Shadow Flame, so both of the procs do affect it. Also, the playstyle or the main ability of Malefic Rapture also deals Shadow Flame damage, so a decent portion of Affliction's kit as a Hellcaller is also being amped up by both of these effects, though primarily will be impacted by Xylan's Cruelty more than anything. Switching over to Destruction, they are very much in the same boat, also seeing buffs that partially affect PvP. Buffs such as Wither getting buffed up by 10% instead of 15%, though also does not affect them in PvP. The same thing goes for Blackened Soul, buffed up by 20%, but only in dungeons and raids, not for PvP. Zelen's ferocity and cruelty have also been buffed up to be 8% of an increase towards fire spells as well as shadow spells compared to Affliction Warlock, up from 4%. So it's a decent gain for them specifically. Though, again, Destruction also gonna mostly benefit from Zelen's ferocity, but they themselves actually have a decent bit of Shadow Flame damage as part of their kit for some of their abilities. So they'll actually be able to get a bit of a mixed experience with Hellcaller buffs, where I think more of their kit will actually end up getting some decent buffs from the Hellcaller passives. The actual tier set is actually going to be a little bit more impactful, as it actually touches your hero specs a little bit more directly, especially some of the nodes. Like the 2-set reads, Mark of Xavius increases Black and Soul damage by additional 3% per stack. Mark of Xavius being this passive over here that buffs up the damage of Wither, but also buffs up Black and Soul damage per stack of Wither. So now you're actually going to have a little bit better scaling for that Black and Soul damage as you build up more stacks. And also we have the 4-set, or rather a part of the 2-set, that buffs up Malevolence, where Malevolence now increases the stack count of Wither by additional 2 stacks. Malevolence being this buff right here that bursts you with a bunch of haste, but also causes your Soul Shard spenders to stack up those stacks of Wither a little bit faster. So now you'll be able to get those stacks of Wither quicker, causing Wither to deal additional damage, but also ramping up the damage of Black and Soul, which scales with stacks of Wither as well. So these two are just going to basically empower the active element of the Hellcaller damage amplification. Then we have the 4-set, where casting Malevolence grants you 2 stacks of Backdraft, so it actually plays you with your resources, and Malevolence prevents a Black and Soul from consuming stacks while dealing damage 15% faster for 8 seconds. So on its own, Wither normally just deals damage passively, so now during Malevolence you will actually be able to get a bit more of an active effect, where the more aggressively you can spend your soul shards, the faster you can build up these stacks, causing the Wither to proc effects like Black and Soul to deal more immediate damage. It transforms the dot itself into an ability that now has a bit more of an immediate damage burst to it, and that burst is very, very visible for a spec like Destruction Warlock, which is also very, very bursty. So now Wither, while it is a kind of ever-present dot that deals really solid damage on its own, now there's a bit more of an active component that plays around with your resource specifically. It doesn't necessarily give you like a new ability to experiment with or work with, it just makes that burst window inside of the Malevolence, which grants you a lot of haste, so it already naturally granted you a lot of a burst window. It makes that burst window a little bit stronger and a little bit more potent. The tier set is only ever so slightly different for the spec of Affliction Warlocks, however, where Mark of Xavius will increase Black and Soul damage by additional 6% per stack, where Malevolence also increases stack count of Wither by an additional 2 stacks. Because a lot of the playstyle and a lot of the damage sources for Affliction actually comes from the dot of Wither itself, since they're very damage over time heavy. So this tier set actually ends up leveraging the Black and Soul to give them a bit more of a burst window that a Destruction Warlock would end up utilizing. The 4-set reads, casting Malevolence gets just 2 stacks of Tormented Crescendo, so it gives you a bunch of procs to work with, allowing you to use a few of the Malefic Raptures rather quickly in order to be able to ramp up your Wither a little faster. But also it prevents the Black and Soul from consuming stacks while dealing damage 25% faster, so Black and Soul ends up being a bit more of this burst window for Affliction in order to give it like a very, very similar feel to that of a Destruction. So in essence, the way that the tier set functions is it just gives you a much bigger burst of Black and Soul specifically. You're still going to get substantial damage from your Wither as you are able to ramp it up and have it hold its stacks for a little bit longer before Black and Soul starts to devour on those stacks, but you are also front-loading the Black and Soul damage by a significant bit. So then it will end up playing around heavily around those burst windows with Malevolence and being to ramp up that Wither so that Black and Soul can deal additional damage during those burst situations. It takes a spec like Affliction, which is primarily a damage over time spec with Hellcaller, that's also very damage over time focused, so it's more passive steady damage and really juices that burst component of Black and Soul through the interaction of how it gets amped up by Malevolence even further. So it's going to make Affliction much stronger of a 1-minute burst spec, and it's going to give them I think a stronger burst window as well. Lastly, we have the spec of Soul Harvester, which also has gotten buffed up quite a decent bit for both Affliction and Demonology. Certain specific talent nodes, like the actual damage of your demonic soul, has been increased by 55%, which is of a decent bit of a gain. Procs such as Wicked Reaping has also been buffed up by 75%, though not in PvP. In the Dot of Soul Anathema, the procs off of your demonic soul, whenever it lashes out at a target, has also got buffed up by 40%, though also not for PvP. So a lot of the Soul Harvester changes are more a dungeon and a raid specific tuning. The tier set, however, will heavily leverage the Soul Harvester playstyle and this demonic soul, unlocking some new potential in the soul to make it a bit more of an active participant as part of your gameplay. With a 2 set and 4 set that reads, Shadow of Death unleashes a demonic soul to assault your current target for 9 seconds, dealing shadow damage and cleaving shadow damage within 10 yards to nearby enemies. So the actual soul itself now jumps on the target specifically. Shadow of Death being an ability that procs your demonic soul to erupt and grant you a bunch of procs. For Affliction, it's through ability of Soul Rot. For Demonology, it's through summoning your big tyrant. So now whenever you hit something with a full Soul Rot, you'll now see the demonic soul trump on that target directly and start lashing out at it specifically. It'll just follow the target for the duration while the buff of the tier set is active, cleaving everything around you. So it actually becomes a bit more of like an active participant. It isn't quite actually like a demon pet for Demonology to leverage, to use, but it's just kind of visually looks really cool, and the damage that it deals is actually not terrible, especially in AoE content. The 4 set reads, Demonic Soul damage is increased by 45%, and Wicked Reaping damage is also further increased by 45%. Your Demonic Soul generates 1 Soul Shard every 3 seconds while assaulting enemies. So the Soul Shard, the actual soul itself, will not only buff up the base damage abilities of the hero spec, but also will now fuel you full of resources while it's attacking the target. So not only does it actually deal damage all on its own, but it also fuels you full of resources, giving you a significant damage window with the soul playstyle in particular. For Affliction Warlock, I always felt that Soul Harvester matched him pretty well, as it just fuels him full of resources, giving him a lot more procs and making the spec feel so much faster and snappier to play. Cycling between free and instant cast procs of Malefic Rapture to either instant cast Shadow Bolts or quick drains with your Soul Drain ability, but the tier set itself doesn't necessarily change the way that Affliction plays, as all it really is just enhances the way that Affliction runs. The tier set itself and the Demonic Soul does a lot of heavy lifting in this playstyle, as it deals really good damage by itself. It is a solid bit of a kit, and all of its components synergize with Affliction super well. Affliction, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily play differently, but you get a lot more procs, you get a lot faster resource generation, he feels smoother because you're no longer bogged down by resources, you don't need to wait and save those resources during very specific moments, you get to use them with a little bit more freedom. It just enhances Affliction to play better while offering additional damage, and I feel like Soul Harvester for Affliction has always been a fantastic to play combo, as it feels really good together. But Demonology, the tier set isn't different. It still is going to get your Demonic Soul to slash and claw the target. It looks visually awesome. It also does increase the damage of Demonic Soul and Wicked Reaping and generates a bunch of resources. So by itself, as long as things are tuned correctly, it'll probably be decent enough. But very similar to the playstyle of Diabolist, it is also rather passive. The extra resources you get while the demon is clawing at the target can be kind of cool and gives you like a way to burst at the targets, because you can get a lot of, procs happening back to back to back. But by itself, it just basically ties itself to one of your major abilities that you'll use every minute, and that's really about it. It just does a lot of its damage passively while also amping up the rest of its kit that doesn't necessarily involve some sort of a change in rotation or a change in playstyle in order to better leverage that set. It just amplifies what already exists. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Also, join our Discord community, especially if you want to keep up with any patch 11.2 last minute tuning and changes, as there'll likely be plenty of it. But also, apparently they got some new builds like 11.2.5 and 11.2.7 somewhere out internally, so those maybe make it to its way to PTR very soon. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.